Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us this afternoon for week 10 of the SOA at Home Festival. I'm Anna Ganley, and today's session is Translations in Conversation. I'll hand over to our panel soon, but just a couple of housekeeping notices before that. As I'm sure you'll know by now, all of our festival events are free, but if you can afford to donate a few pounds to the Authors Emergency Fund, the link is in the top of the chat box to the right. This session will be for 45 minutes with time for questions at the end, so please do post any questions, queries or comments into the chat box throughout the session. I'll be on hand in the background with any technical issues that you have, so just type them into the chat box and I'll pick those up. And if there are any technical issues throughout the session, if you just reconnect, then that should reconnect you to the live stream. And I will now hand you over to the chair of the session, Daniel Hahn.
Thanks, Anna. Hi, everyone. Apologies, first of all, my video, I think, is going to come and go. For some reason, Webinar Jam doesn't like my connection. So if I disappear, hopefully you'll be able to continue hearing me. I also noticed that the photo of me is rather less unkempt than the reality of me. So I'm not so bothered by looking like that for 45 minutes. I'm delighted to have been asked to chair this conversation today with Katy and Arunava, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. We're going to be talking, as I'm sure you know, about working during lockdown, about being creative, being productive during lockdown while working as translators. As Anna said, there is a chat facility for you to ask questions. We'll leave plenty of time for your questions towards the end. And in case you miss any of this, the whole thing is also going to be recorded and it'll be on the SOA Vimeo channel shortly afterwards. Brief introductions then. Katy Derbyshire is, as I'm sure you know, a translator from German who's based in Berlin. I'm not going to list all the people she's translated, but I'm going to mention Clemens Meyer because partly because he's the writer through whom I discovered Katy's work, but also because the two of them together were longlisted for the 2017 Man Booker International Prize. Katy was also I seem to be back. That's disappointing. Katy was also the translator of the fair at the imaginary 2020 London Book Fair. But despite being imaginary, she was, of course, a very fine translator of the fair for us. She served on the jury of many prizes and was involved in the movement behind the founding of the Warwick Prize for Women in Translation, particularly. She's also finally in what I was going to say in her spare time, which is hilarious. In her spare time, Katy is also now a publisher launching the V&Q Books list later this year. Joining Katy is Arunava Sinha, who's a translator of contemporary, modern and classic Bengali fiction, non-fiction and poetry, whose work has been published in India, in the UK and the US. His translations have won him the Crossword Translation Award on 2 occasions, been shortlisted for the Independent Foreign Fiction Prize and many others. He's also the Associate Professor of Practice in the Creative Writing Department at Ashoka University and Books Editor at Scroll. He's now based in New Delhi. Is that where you are now, Arunava?
Yes.
Are you in Delhi now?
I'm in Delhi, at home. Yes.
And Katy, you're home in Berlin?
I am, yes.
Okay, I want to start by asking you both a sort of general question about the last few months. And maybe, Katy, I'll start with you. How different has this been from your normal, I mean, in terms of the translating festival specifically, how different has this been from your normal working arrangement? I mean, sitting home and translating is supposed to be what translators do anyway.
In my case, it is quite a lot different because I've discovered about 15, 16 years ago that I don't work well on my own in the corner of the bedroom. And since then, I've had shared office space, which obviously I haven't been using. So I'm not used to that. And of course, my family's been around me all the time. So I'm using up their space, they're using up my space, which has been less awful than I remembered it being, actually. So I'm quite comforts to that.
In theory, it is the aim to work as much like normal as possible. What I mean is the aim still to wake up in the morning and do your translating and get through a certain number of words and finish the day?
Very much so, yeah.
Arunava, what about you? How different is this from your translating work, Arunava?
Well, yes, as you said, most of my translation takes place at home anyway. and in isolation. So it took me a little while to wake up to the fact that the world had changed actually from about, say, early March or late February. But I think in terms of space, it's not a problem, although I think my family is a little disconcerted to see me around all the time. Normally they're out, but now they're hanging around at home as well. So sometimes they look at me strangely. I think the family dog looks at me rather more strangely, wondering when I'm going to go out, and I don't. So he's quite flummoxed. But more than space or anything, and I'm sure you're going to come to that. It's very clear that something has changed profoundly, and it's hanging in the air. And that despite the best intentions of starting my day at the usual hour and getting through, as you said, a certain number of words as before, I'm not able to hit that target every day. And it was really painful at first, but I've sort of adjusted to it now. I told myself that, all right, it's going to take longer than you thought.
And can you pin down particular reasons it's been difficult to meet those normal targets? Is it to do with practical things? Is it just to do with it's quite hard to focus? Are there logistical things? What are the? It can't all be the dog. I mean, there must be other things.
Yeah, no, it's not practical things at all, to be honest. It's just the notion of the fact that for one thing, I think all of us have been obsessively checking the numbers in the world and in our respective countries, and then in our respective states or cities to find out where it's at. And there's been the 5 stages of grief we've gone through in trying to grapple with it. But more than that, it's the sense that one moment you lull yourself into believing that everything is normal and you're going to finish the book, and maybe you'll be a little late as usual, and you'll turn it in and it'll come out, and then bang, it suddenly strikes you there's not going to be any book the rest of the year in all probability, which means that no new books are coming out. The publishers have now gone from, in India, they've gone from, oh, everything is fine, we're just delaying books, to private conversations on, do you think publishing will survive? So all this obviously adds to the uncertainty and makes you sometimes wonder why the hell you're even doing all this. It's not that that puts me off completely, but it's certainly slowing me down and forcing my mind to grapple with useless thoughts, really.
What about you, Katy? What are the sort of the particular things? I was talking about, I suppose, in a way, it's a thing that is anxiety related to whether there's any point to this, whether publishing is going to be there anyway. Are there particular things you can point to and go, actually, this is really why? It's not just, I have the same number of hours per day and I still have my laptop, but there must be some reason why the kind of output is feeling different.
Fear, really, general anxiety and fear for the future and my family and how is everybody going to survive. I suppose also fear, particularly as a new publisher, that will people be able to buy books? Will they want to buy books? Will they want to buy these particular books that I've been working on? But I have to say, actually, for me, translation is an activity and a place that I can go that blocks those things out. I really get a lot of, it makes me calm. And because more of my work at the moment is not translation, it's new things that I've never done before, the translation in particular has been a real comfort to me, and I find I can lose myself for maybe not hours at a time, but good 30 minutes at a time, just in the text with my text, and that's
so you're able sort of to up to a point to compartmentalize and go, when I'm really in this text, my head is really there. I'm going to not think about the end of the world for the next 45 minutes.
Yeah, but that's one of the things I love about it. That's it's always been that way, and that's been, maybe that's why I do it. Just to be inside somebody else's head, almost somebody else's text, certainly, and to have that joy is great. It's helped enormously.
And to be immersed, I presume, for both of you, in texts that are pre-quarantine, that are pre-COVID texts that are from a world when the anxieties are about different things, presumably. Have you been able, Katy, Arunava was saying that he kind of started out wanting to or expecting to kind of be productive at the same pace and eventually decided to give himself a break and realize that it was okay. Have you been able to do the same thing and sort of get over that? I usually produce today.
Not really. I'm not very good at that. I have been able to give myself a break and not get up early in the morning anymore. So that's already, that's for me, that's a big deal. No, I rarely sit down at the same time as I never have. No, I have never, since this started, since March, sat down at the same time as I used to sit down. And then there are a lot more breaks. Yeah. But I'm trying to do the same amount of work. Maybe I'm pushing myself too hard.
What about you, Arunava? Are you giving yourself? Are you trying to sort of structure your time so that you have, if only for psychological reasons, it's useful to have structure, so you know you're going to start, you know you get a break at this time. Have you tried to be sort of kind of formally rigid about that with your time?
No, not particularly differently from the way it was earlier, in the sense that I would still translate in the interstices, between teaching and preparing for classes and doing my editing work and so on. So I would try to make sure that I had one 3 to 4 hour chunk during the day that's uninterrupted, but it could be in the morning some days and evening or night on others. So that remains, that fluidity remains. But what has happened is, I think that even those 3 hour periods are not uninterrupted anymore in my head. Yeah. So what about you, Danny? How are you dealing with it?
I found certain things easier than I expected and certain things harder than I expected. So I've been fortunate, I think, that I've been pretty productive. I've been finding work relatively easy because I've been kind of compartmentalizing. I realized, however, a few days ago that I have not, in 3.5 months, read a book. I've not read anything. I have things I've been waiting to read. In fact, there's a book I'm going to read for Katy. I promised it for Katy ages ago, and I haven't got around to, because I have not been able to get into a book. I've been able to sort of produce. So in terms of my work, it looks like I've been kind of, churning out words at the usual pace. But there are other things that I'm only noticing latterly that something must be going on, because there's this whole component of how I tend to spend my time that is there's sort of missing. I was wondering, one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is because I think the original plan had been for us to use this event to, among other things, to kind of share tips for, clever things that we'd worked out for how to be incredibly productive and incredibly brilliant. But it strikes me, and we talked about this a bit by email the other day, that in a way, unless the two of you have secretly and brilliantly learned clever tricks for surviving the plague, in a way, it feels to me that one of the most useful things we can do is actually not share tips, because everyone's in such different situations, but sort of be honest about the things that we found difficult and the fact that we haven't actually been working in the normal way. I mean, I presume now, of course, at the time when you can correct me and say, no, I have the solution to working in lockdown. But I presume that you don't, and really all we can do is kind of be open about the ways in which we found it difficult, and that may help people more than saying, I've discovered that if you have an espresso every 11 minutes, that makes you really productive.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work, because I've tried that, and I wouldn't recommend that at all.
No, in fact, it's getting worse, if anything, if I have to be absolutely honest. Because at one point there was at least a sense that perhaps this would end in about 3 months. But now, at least here in India, there's no end in sight. And it may well last the rest of the calendar year or even longer. So that's quite despair-inducing. The only thing I've done for myself is to take on harder texts to translate, hoping that it will occupy my mind more deeply than something that can flow easier, because the moment it's flowing easier, your mind starts drifting a bit. So I'm working on the toughest assignment that I have, the toughest bit of text, and the going is naturally slower as a result. But I think I'm more absorbed in it while I'm working on it. So to that extent, it's useful. The other thing is a piece that I read recently, which was very helpful to me, which was a piece on a play written by Tagore, of course, who else, which is called The Post Office. And very strangely, it is about a young boy who is terminally ill, and he spends all his days sitting at the window of his front room. He's not allowed to go out, and the world comes to him as he gazes out the window, and he sees everybody, and they come and talk to him. So he is, of course, in quarantine. And I think that essay pointed out that it's time to perhaps disregard the ideas of corporate productivity for a while and think perhaps in terms of the usefulness of your activities, and if it extends to providing care for others in one form, any form, whether it's through conversations or whether it is through email or text or anything, that you can count it as a good way of spending your time. And normally we would consider these things interruptions into our daily schedule, but reading that piece really made me think that yes, that's fine. If somebody feels a little better after a chat, maybe that is a better use of my time at this point, rather than knocking off another 300 words of translated text.
Which I think is probably familiar from parenting. It's familiar. It sounds familiar to me from being a parent. So yes, I'm interested in what you said about choosing. Sorry, Danny. I'm interested in what you said about choosing a difficult text, because I have sort of 3 different things that I'm working on usually, and some are fine for when I haven't slept well because they're easy, and some are just really difficult. Some are emotionally difficult. So I kind of try and chop and change depending on how I'm feeling, and of course the deadlines. Yeah.
Can you tell us, Katy, what they are? These? What are the things that you're actually working on specifically?
So the thing that I find easy is I'm working on a pop star's autobiography, and I've been doing it for ages. It's very slow. The deadline is very long, and just doing it very slowly. And it is very sort of colloquial. The only thing I have to research is kind of the names of 1980s synthesizers, and then I translate for a memorial center in Berlin. So I have a lot of texts about the Holocaust, which is, I can't do that every day. I can only do that for like a couple of hours at a time. And then I'm working on a co-translation with my lovely colleague Aicha Turkoglu for V&Q Books, which is set in Turkey, written in German. And that's the joyful one.
Thank you. It's nice to have the possibility of moving between things depending on your mood. So then it becomes not just about how much you can be productive, but also what you're getting out of it yourself, and whether it's distraction or a kind of intellectual workout or whatever it is, that you can get things out of the work rather than just thinking about the work as an obligation to produce X thousand words.
Yeah.
I'd like to ask each of you just maybe if you'd be prepared to read us, even if it's just a minute or so, something you've been working on, one or other thing you've been working on in this lockdown. Because however difficult this is, neither of you has failed to produce 1 minute's worth of work in the last 3 months. So it'd be really nice to hear from something that has come out of your work in this time. Arunava, why don't you go first? Let's hear something that you've...
All right.
Yes.
On Danny, you're going to read as well.
I haven't got anything, so I'm not going to read as well.
Right. You haven't done a minute's work in 3 months. You've only probably finished about 4 books in 4 months, right? I'm obviously not commenting on... I don't know. It's hard to say. Yeah. Well, okay, so there's this book that I finished translating, and I just want to spend a minute talking about it because there was a strange coincidence. The book is set 2 years ago in the Western Indian state of Maharashtra, and the backdrop is it's loosely titled "The Sickle," and the backdrop is a combination of real life situations there which have to do with no water, droughts for many farmers while there is an abundance of water elsewhere in the state, with a series of farmer suicides because farmers are so trapped in debt cycles that eventually many of them see no way out, and it's been a recurrent feature in India for a while. And simultaneously, there's been this practice of aborting the girl child, aborting, they do sex determination tests, and then when they find out that it's a girl who's going to be born, they illegally abort the fetus. And that is linked to the fact that in all these families, in these rural families, every person is an earning member. However, if you have a girl, and then the girl will grow up and get married, so her earning capabilities will shift to the groom's family. So it doesn't help her parents at all to bring her up and invest. I'm just saying all this very coldly because that's all I can do right now. So you get the picture. So this is the backdrop. And then against this backdrop, in actual fact, in 2018, there was a huge march of farmers from different parts of Maharashtra to the capital city of Bombay to place their demands. It was called, not very originally, the Long March. And that Long March is the culmination of this novel. And at the same time that I was translating it, what happened in India was that the Prime Minister here declared a lockdown at 4 hours notice. Literally at 4 hours notice. At 8 p.m. in the evening, he said, from midnight, we are locked down. And one of the outcomes of that was that there are huge numbers of workers in India who are incorrectly labeled migrant workers because they're not migrants, they're moving within their own country, but they move from the villages usually to the cities to work there, and they work as in construction or in transportation, or even as porters at railway stations and so on. And because of the lockdown, all business activities ceased, including construction and everything. And we were left with millions of people who overnight had nowhere to go, no food to eat, because they buy their food with the money they make every day. And all of them had no choice but to start walking home. So there was this long march taking place from the different Indian cities at the same time, everyone going home. And it created all kinds of, it was incredible what happened, and the fact that the administration had not thought it through. So that was a strange coincidence. So I'll just read a little bit if you like, although this is not the part about the Long March, but it's pretty grim. I'm warning you, but here we go. The cotton farmer's wife. It had been 2 years since anyone had entered the middle room. It was still lying empty. How much furniture could a farmer have anyway? And they were no exception. Cotton, 3 years old, was piled all the way up to the ceiling against the eastern wall. Umesh's wife, Vaishali, couldn't bring herself to sell it, although they had been short of money even before Umesh's death. The wholesale traders' agents frequented the village regularly. One word from her and they would pick up the stock and pay her in cash. But she didn't want to sell it. It was the last crop that Umesh had grown with his own blood and sweat. Let it stay this way, heaped where she could see it. Vaishali went in there even if no one else did, sweeping and mopping the stone floor twice a day. Umesh had built this room to live in a bit of comfort. Only the foundation had been laid in his father's time, and the space had filled up with grass and weeds. There were 2 rooms on either side and a long veranda running in front. Putting his arm around Vaishali's waist in the semi-darkness of a winter evening, Umesh had said, "It'll just be you and me in that room, no one else." Vaishali was about to mention their daughter and son, but Umesh had clamped his hand on her mouth in pained anger. The pillars were in place by then, and the roof would soon be laid. It would be best to delay the roof a little, for there was no water to be had from the skies except around the middle of July. To ensure a strong roof, the water had to accumulate on it for some time, but water was so very scarce in this district. Still, Umesh had built a strong roof, spending a little extra on rafters of good sal wood. He was probably spending a little too much out of his farming loan, but he was consumed by the whole thing. He had painted the wood and the walls himself, doing it up bit by bit. That same winter, Umesh had brought home a large pile of the cotton he had grown on his field and stuck it against the wall. A new room, a new harvest. Just beyond the border of their village, which was named Kajli, was the timber depot of the forest department. Not only had Umesh got the wood for the rafters there, he had also meant to get the wood for a new bed, which he would build after selling the cotton. The bed was never put together, but its invisible image seemed to be drawn on the floor, a rectangular shape and the marks left by the feet that Vaishali could see as she swabbed the floor. And yes, she would glance upwards at least once. A picture drawn in black lines would come to life for a moment in her head before vanishing. Her husband Umesh hanging from the rafters, his eyes bulging out, his tongue protruding, his neck tilted in a way that suggested he had had no other choice but to surrender himself obediently to his fate. It was a scene that Vaishali saw every day. It was almost as though she went in to clean the room precisely so as to catch a glimpse of it. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you so much. Can I just ask a very, very quick practical question before asking Katy to read? Because of the context, I'm curious to know whether this is the kind of project that requires doing research. And I ask partly because the biggest thing I've been working on during lockdown is a big non-fiction project, which required a huge amount of research. And in a way, that's the thing which, from a completely practical, logistical point of view, was made really difficult by all of the libraries closing, great difficulty in accessing material. Did you have that sort of practical need to actually do research while
Yes.
you're working on this, or it's not that kind of work?
Yeah, I sort of also decided to act as a fact checker, while not doubting the novelist's own research. But I just felt that it wouldn't be bad because normally in Bengali publishing, no one would have done a fact check anyway. So it would be necessary to do one, and instead of passing that on to my English publisher, I thought I'd do it myself. So yeah, it needed research, but most of it was on the internet because in any case, we don't have very robust libraries here in India anymore, sadly. So, and it was mostly to do with reading up the news, so it wasn't so difficult in terms of finding it online. But it did need a lot of checking, yes.
Right. Katy, will you share something that you've been working on?
Yes, it's a little bit more cheerful. So this is what I've been working on with Aicha Tukulu, and it's the first part of a trilogy that I'm publishing with my imprint, and it's something that I've been wanting to do for very, very many years. So that makes me happy in the first place that I'm doing it, and it's also my first co-translation, which is amazing. I wish I had done it earlier, just to get constant feedback and to share. I'm thinking, I wonder if I can archive our comments that we're making on each other's sections. We're just sending back and forth, little kind of 3 or 4 page sections at a time. And some of the comments are pertinent to the translation, but I love them on. And it's the story of a young woman who is born in Turkey in the sort of late 40s, I think, and or early 50s, and grows up and ends up really being a migrant worker and moving to Germany. And we know that actually pretty much from the beginning, that's what's going to happen to her. But the first book is all in Turkey, which is great to have Aicha help me because she understands Turkish and some of the cultural background that I don't have. And this is just the very beginning of the first novel, starting, it's about Gu is the main character, and this is about her father, Timur, who is the title is The Blacksmith's Daughter, and he's the blacksmith. Just a little bit of it. Don't make my husband a murderer, I told him. Stop the car, don't make my husband a murderer. Stop the car and let me out, and then piss off as fast as you can. Timur exhales audibly and turns his head away so Fatma can't see him tearing up. He's still struggling for breath. He's grateful, he's so grateful that fate has chosen this woman for him. She must have been written in his book of life on the very day he was born. He doesn't know what's happened to him, where all the time has gone. Just yesterday, he was a little boy in ragged trousers, scrumping pears from the neighbour's garden with his friends. The neighbour had spotted the thieves, and they'd all noticed and jumped swiftly over the wall, pockets and shirts full of fruit. All but Timur, who'd been a little too slow, as usual. He could run just as fast as the others, but he always missed his chance to make a bolt for it. Now he stood there, rooted to the spot, and the neighbour ran past Timur up to the wall and yelled after the escaping boys, come back and give Timur a pear at least. Great friends you are. Then he turned back to Timur and said nothing but run. and Timur didn't dare go past the neighbour, so he ran all the way across the garden and jumped over the wall on the other side. Just yesterday he'd been a little boy, not all that good at school, not all that skilled, not all that popular, until he began to help his father, the blacksmith, helped him blow the heavy bellows and fetch big buckets of water for Nejmi to quench the glowing iron. Timur had built up muscles in the workshop, had proved himself hardworking and untiring. He had learned quickly and had enjoyed being with his father all day long. He'd also enjoyed testing out his new strength. The boy who'd once avoided fights now let no opportunity pass him by to show off his superiority. It's comforting.
Thank you both. I have to say, listening to, having said earlier that I haven't been able to read a book kind of in full for a while, it is nice to be reminded of what that is like, what that experience of having someone tell you a story is like from both of you. I'm glad, Katy, you mentioned that thing of co-translating with Aisha, which I would echo. I've loved the co-translations I've done. And I wonder whether translation obviously is always collaborative because we have authors and we have editors or whatever. But I wonder whether one of the things that happened the last few months is, even if it hasn't changed, we may have started to think about how we value those collaborations slightly differently, because having one of the books I've been working on as well was a co-translation, and probably everything I've worked on in lockdown, I've somehow been more engaged with my co-conspirators than I would normally be, or it feels like that. And I wonder whether it's just that we somehow value that, the kind of constant contact and the things that we don't get from Katy, like you having a shared workspace or whatever. I'm just going to ask them both one last thing, and then we're going to take some questions from the rest of you. There are a little over 200 people watching this, which is a matter of some concern. Hello. It'd be great if you could think about some questions you'd like to put to Katy or to Arunava. I have been glancing at the chat as we've been talking, and there's a lot of enthusiasm for the Pairini Borderless Book Club, and also for Middlemarch, for the reading of Middlemarch, which I would also heartily endorse. And I'm glad, I think it might have been Kat who started that conversation. I'm glad that's part of where this conversation has gone. So if you'd like to write some questions for Katy and Arunava in the chat, we will come to them in just a moment. And I wanted to ask you both, just before we do that, about your other work, your kind of the translation adjacent work. Arunava, you are supposed to be, when you're not translating, one of the things you're supposed to be doing is teaching. And I assume that has been, if it hasn't stopped happening, it's happening in a very different form for you.
Yes, the teaching itself is happening, in those little windows now, which we've all come to despise quite heartily. Because you see 30 faces on a screen, all in tiny windows, and 29 of them are not even there. And they've just, no, but I think what's happened with translation, very interestingly, is that a small group of about a dozen of my students are actually, because in the summer breaks, they have nowhere to go and nothing to do, they're working on translation projects themselves. So some of my time has been actually going on mentoring them, and well, not so much mentoring them as holding their hand and telling them that it's going to be great, just keep at it and don't worry about the deadline and so on. And very sort of fortuitously, a Calcutta-based publisher has agreed to bring out these small Kindle editions of 3 stories in translation by respective authors. So we are also hoping that these kids will actually work on collections of 3 stories each, which will be published, and that's fantastic for them, because they're 19 and 20, and to actually see their work out there for others to read is going to be a tremendous motivator for them, and I'm feeling very happy for them, because they're far less stressed, I find, than their friends during these holidays.
You shared, Arunava, I can't remember, I think it was on social media, a film that the students put together, a sort of gratitude towards the people who've been teaching them, including some of your students reading from something you've written yourself about falling in love with the text. And it was very heartening to see them, I suppose, just to see them being okay and being passionate and being excited and feeling like the world hasn't just stopped for them.
Yeah, because my attempt has actually been to not allow them to think too much, because the moment they do, then they will realize the enormity of it all. So I try to keep them busy with small tasks, and I throw challenges at them, and I make them just do sometimes things that I could very well do myself, but just to give them a sense of purpose. And it's been really useful, I would say, for me certainly, and I'm hoping for them as well.
Thank you, Katy. We touched on the fact that you have a publishing list launching later in the year, and there are some aspects of it that are obviously particularly challenging in these circumstances, because we don't know what retail is going to look like, we don't know what publishing and what the economy is going to look like, and that sort of thing. But have you been able to? I mean, does it feel possible still? I mean, do you still feel like you're moving towards a real thing?
It does. Partly, I think, because I'm lucky enough to be in Germany, where shops open, non-essential shops open towards the end of April. So I feel sometimes like I'm living in a possible future compared to other countries. It wasn't very good timing for me personally, because everything I do on that side of my work is absolutely new to me. And to be doing that on my own from my front room has not been helpful, and has not helped with the fear. But I do feel like, okay, I can see from being in Berlin that although certain aspects simply aren't going to come back that soon, there will be no clubbing in Berlin this year, certainly. And I'm missing live music. Certain things actually will come back, and one of those is bookshops, which is a great comfort. And I'm looking at I've got a sort of half an eye on the chat.
Well, there's a question from Kat Hall, which is related to this, which is about, Katy, if you can tell us how the imprint project came about. So give us a little bit of background to how V&Q Books came to be.
I will in 1 second, after telling you that I'm really reassured that some people still are reading and are getting that sort of mental help from literature. What happened with the imprint was that I was at a loss, and I didn't have any work coming up. Something had been cancelled, and I was walking around the Frankfurt Book Fair 2 years ago, like when it happened, and thought, maybe not having a translation to be starting next week frees my mind up to think about what I really want, and it turned out that what I really wanted was to make books actually happen from start to finish. And I found a German indie publisher who we happened to have an appointment just to talk about nothing in particular, and I mentioned this idea, and my now colleague said, "Don't tell anyone else about this." Don't tell anyone else this plan. I want to ask the team, and then they got back to me, and we started doing it. So that's nearly 2 years ago now.
Great, thank you. We have a question which I'm keen to ask you both. A question from Marta Jurosz, who says, it's a question for both of you. Is the current situation making you rethink your priorities regarding what to translate? Arunava, how about you? Let's go with you first.
Yeah, well, it is actually. Thanks for that question. But the single most difficult book I've translated in my entire life was supposed to have come out this September, and now it's been postponed to sometime next year or the year after. I have no idea when. So one thing I sort of thought was that this might be a good time to embark on a similar project, take up a book that would normally be very difficult, and I would keep postponing because they would be, lower hanging fruits to pluck. But since everything is going to be pushed back anyway, I can also look my current publisher deadlines in the eye and say, forget it, you're not going to bring it out anyway anytime soon. So I am actually going to start maybe around September on a very long project, which may well take up to a year. And for me, that would be very unusual to spend a year on one book, but I think it's a good time to do it.
You're choosing this, so just to be clear, because it's a good time because it's an opportunity for the book to come into existence, or because you think this is good for you?
Yeah, I don't know. Just that I feel that, I would normally, and this is going to be a speculative project, because nobody will commission that book till I've finished it. I know that. So I'm just going to do it under my own steam. And I think it's a good time I think it's the only time that I can probably work on this project, because normally I'd be torn by the fact that there are other things that have been commissioned and have deadlines. So why am I not doing those? But now with everything postponed, it will actually open up a window which I can stretch.
So it's a now or never for this one.
Yeah.
Katy, what about you? Have you started to think differently about how you choose? I suppose how you choose what you translate, but also possibly how you choose what you publish, because you're curating lists in two quite different ways now.
Yeah, I have not, as a kind of a knock-on effect of the virus. I think we've all had more time to think, and coincidentally last week this quite important report came out, rethinking diversity in publishing, about UK publishing, and how writers of colour and Black writers aren't getting the same as white writers in the UK, and that has really set the ball rolling in my mind, and had sent me along kind of new avenues of what German writers might be, writers of colour from Germany might be interesting to a British and Irish readership. And I think that has been, although it's very good timing, coincidentally, for this report to come out, because obviously they worked on it for a whole year, I think it has gained more attention, and we've had more time to think about it, perhaps, than we would have otherwise had.
There's a related question from Katarina Ferreira about related to the question of how you kind of choose what to publish and what to focus on, which is whether you things that you've read and the way you read things has changed, and whether you maybe react differently to things you read because we've been going through this strange experience. Does that ring a bell with either of you?
I feel like I'm less reading what everybody else is reading. I feel like I'm just choosing, first of all, what I can get in my local bookshop, because it's, stocking issues. It's a great bookshop, so they can go book. And also less listening to the crowd and more listening to myself. Does that make sense? I think that's what I'm doing.
Arunava, what about you? You did mention earlier, following the news and that sort of thing, and I wonder whether those things have an impact on the way you read. I mean, for example, the translation you're doing that you read from.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That text itself, of course, acquired this strange new significance. But other than that, reading for myself, Danny, it's been like you. I don't think I've managed to actually finish more than 1.5 books in this entire period, and it's been very slow and distracted going. I actually thought that maybe I should just read thrillers instead, but even those didn't seem to hold much attraction. I bought a lot of books though, but they're just lying there.
Yeah, I've done exactly the same. There's a question. There's a question about Katy's piano. This may have to be the last question, but I'm quite curious to know the answer as well. This from Beth. I see you have a piano.
Here, can you see the little guitar?
Just saying, all the best people. Question is, what do you enjoy playing the most?
So this is embarrassing, because my plan during lockdown, I was like, right at the very beginning, I said, okay, I'm going to learn to play the ukulele. My partner plays, makes, and teaches ukulele, and we sat down 3 times. So I've been managing to read books, but I have not managed to learn to play any new instrument. I also teaching myself the piano very, very slowly. I have to say I prefer it to the ukulele because it doesn't require you to sing, which I don't. And that has also fallen by the wayside. So those beautiful private moments of trying to make a tune with the piano, actually I miss them, but I hope they'll come back. Working at home in the same room as the piano makes me not want to touch it.
So the piano and the ukulele are on the same list as people reading Middlemarch, because now is when you do those things. And you've wasted your lockdown if you haven't also learned to speak Greek as well. Yeah. Let's do one last quick question, because we're going to have to break in just a moment. And this is, I suppose it's a question to do with how optimistic we are quite broadly. This is from Anam, and the question is, considering the circumstances, is there any hope for aspiring literary translators able to break into the industry anytime soon? Anam is finishing in the MA in August this year and is unsure what course of action to take after that. Are the two of you, I mean, I'll let you answer that, but I'll widen that question a bit, just to ask about what sort of optimism you have about the profession being able to grow, being able to, I'm not sure recover is the right word, but do you feel, Arunava, you were talking about your students and giving them a sense that it's possible to get work and it's possible to produce things they're proud of and be published. Is that feeling that you're encouraging them to have, is that borne out by your own optimism that it is a possibility?
Yeah. No, before I answer that, I just want to take a second to say hello to all the great translators who are here today. And it's so wonderful to see all of you, and the fact, thank you for being here, and how much we depend on one another. It just came home to me all over again. Yeah. So I'm very optimistic, yes, because I actually think that if big publishing faces tough times in India, it'll be small publishing that will take over, and small publishing will take a lot more risks and probably publish a lot more translations. So I don't see it as necessarily a bad thing that the Penguin Random Houses and HarperCollinses and Hachette are going to rethink their business plan for the next 3 years. I think, in fact, the time is ripe to launch a translation press in India.
Excellent. Let's do that. But before we do that, Kate, you can answer that same question.
We've already got somebody here, who's stuck in India and isn't leaving anytime soon. So she's probably going to set it up for us.
Okay.
That's last that I knew, Deborah was up in the hills in Himachal, and last that I knew, she hadn't left yet. So
that's right. Yes, I think that's where she is. Katie, do you feel generally optimistic, not about yourself or your press or your work, but about the ways in which the profession might expand, the opportunities for people like Anam, who's asking about starting out in the profession?
I think in the medium term, I do. I think the reading international literature is one of those. Now, look, I've forgotten how to speak English. It is like a stone rolling down a hill, and it is gathering moss, and it's getting bigger and bigger, and it's going to be unstoppable at some point. And I think that's where we are now. But I do think this is a setback, because I think this is a time when publishers are going to be taking fewer risks, and translation is always seen as a risk, because the editors can't read the book before they acquire the rights. On the other hand, I saw a very inspiring thread on Twitter by, I think it was Sam Byers, talking about how art is still going to happen, even if it's not marketable for the time being, about how artists and writers and musicians aren't going to stop making things and doing their work. It won't be the end of art, and it won't be the end of translation as a literary translation as an art. I think it will be a difficult time to come into the market, if you will, as an emerging translator. I don't think people should stop. I think they should possibly find another job to keep them going realistically, and keep working towards that goal, and keep getting the pleasure out of translation that they can get as artists.
Well, that's a nice way to end our conversation. I think Anna's going to just come back and shut this off. As I said at the top, this is going to go on the SOA Society of Authors Vimeo channel at some point. A reminder to those of you watching that I suspect many of you know already, the 25th, I think it's the 25th annual Sebald lecture is going to be starting at 4 o'clock, which is to say in about 45 minutes from now. And David Bellos is going to be doing that. It's run by BCLT and Writer Centre Norwich, so if you haven't registered, I suspect you can still do that. So we may have some of the same people joining us there. I want to thank Katy and Arunava for being both entertaining and honest in these times in which we need entertainment and honesty. So we're very grateful for those, for both of those things. And Anna, you're going to
thank you,
shut us down.
Yes, just thank you to you all, Arunava, Katy, and Danny, for being so honest and having such a moving discussion. I think that's echoed in the comments in the chat box. Very inspiring, and it's so inspiring to know that it's okay not to be okay. We're just getting through a crisis and doing the best we can. And so it's been really appreciated by the community to hear your real stories about getting through this. So thank you for that. And before we finish, just a reminder for everybody that if you can donate a few pounds to the Authors Emergency Fund, it's a fund that supports authors in financial difficulty due to the health crisis. So there is a link at the top of the chat box if you want to go across to the GoFundMe page to pop a few pounds in our fund. This week in the festival, tomorrow we've got The Reluctant Networker, which is a practical session about online networking in the literary world. And on Wednesday, we have a panel discussion about theatre in crisis. And then on Thursday, we have afternoon team with Inua Ellams, who was a judge for the 2020 Eric Gregory Awards. And he's also just received a travelling scholarship, so we can find out what his travel plans are. So to book for any of these events, head across to societyofauthors.org/events and you can register your place there. Thanks again for joining us this afternoon. Do continue the conversation on Twitter using the festival hashtag SOA. Thanks for joining us and see you again soon.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Danny.